Let me say right from the start today, we're really in some difficult material here in Acts. And I'm not trying to, some people say, well, this is not a fair presentation of Acts. Well, you can read Acts yourself and then take it at its face value. So there's nothing stopping you from taking Acts according to how it's written. And if you think it's a fair presentation, that's fair enough. I'm not against that. And I don't think anyone has any real complaint in that regard, because Acts has been presented to about maybe 50 billion people over the last 2,000 years, and nobody has has been in any position to say anything contrary to it to any extent. So I don't think Acts is suffering from me. Acts has got 50 billion people on its side, maybe a trillion. So I don't see that one person who doesn't go along with Acts in its overt form and feels there's more lurking, as I said, underneath the surface than originally meets the eye. And a person who in fact can show you the sources to some extent and the material that is lurking underneath the surface of Acts, I don't think that's to be condemned. And that's what a university is for. So as I said at the beginning, if you feel this is not, if you're looking for spiritual nourishment, I admit I won't be able to give it to you. If you want spiritual nourishment, you do have to go to a synagogue, a church, a mosque, someplace like that. But if you want an intellectual challenge, I honestly feel that we can give you an intellectual challenge. And Acts doesn't need its defense. Acts has got every church. It's got St. Peter's in Rome. It's got the Greek Orthodox religion. It's got the Russian Orthodox religion. It's got, even in today's world, 1 billion defenders. It doesn't need a defense from me. It's got its advocates all over the universe. So what I want to find is digging underneath the surface to look at Christian origins. That's what we're trying to do. And in particular, look at the Paul-James relationship as a factor influencing the presentation of the book of Acts. I think we are proving that the Paul-James split, if you feel it's a split, or relationship if you feel it's a relationship, or a polemic, argument, discussion if you want to put it more politely, has a lot of bearing on the way Acts is presenting things. So for instance, we showed you that when they go up on the steps in the temple and argue with people every day, which is the picture we have in this other book as well, the Pseudo-Clementine Recognitions book, that James is missing from the picture. It's Peter and John, and we would normally be led to expect that it would be Peter, John, and James, whichever James we think is the functioning one. James, the brother, meaning the brother of John, or if you prefer the approach that I've been trying to suggest, James, the brother of Jesus, should have been there. And the fact that he isn't there makes one wonder why he isn't there. Now that's a legitimate question. If I were at the Scott Peterson trial, I would certainly expect the lawyer from one side or the other to bring those kind of points up. Otherwise he isn't doing his job as an advocate. So the fact that no one has brought these points up is not my fault. It's to their detriment as scholars and serious people who ask intellectual and critical questions. So why isn't James there? Where's the election of James? And yet we have the episodes that are covering elections. Why is Judas Iscariot important in terms of his position? He's of no importance. Why do we care about who replaced Judas Iscariot when in fact the person who replaces Judas Iscariot is never heard from in Christian history again? Why is that an important episode? If I'm a writer presenting the history of the early church, why do I consider that important and the election of James ignored? And why, when James finally comes into the text, when we know it is James and the other James has been removed, don't they tell us who he is? Well, these are really authentic questions. So I have a right to ask these questions. And if you're doing a serious a bit of work on this book, and this book is proposing to present to you its view of early Christian history, then this book should be able to respond to those questions. Now, the material that we're getting into here is very difficult material. Paul has been introduced to us, and he has decimated the early church, according to this picture here. And in the meantime, the narrative is switching back and forth between Paul, Peter, a person called Philip, who we were not introduced to in the Gospels to any extent. I mean, the Gospels never mention a person called Philip to any extent. It may have listed him as one of the apostles. But he suddenly appears without any discussion of what he's involved in, and he's up in Samaria for some reason, having confrontations with another character who is given short shrift, Simon Magus, who we never hear from again in the book of Acts, and yet who seems to have been an extremely important person in early Christian history as far as all the literature that we know about him. So Acts is certainly making its editorial choices. We all would agree on that, and has a point of view. Now, most people, because they are adherents to the book we have before us, agree with its point of view. I happen to be one who doesn't agree with its point of view. And so you say, well, why are you teaching it? Well, it's best to have people teach things who don't agree with something, then they're not advocates. So if you say, why should I do it, not someone else? Because someone else may just be an advocate and you're not getting a critical view then. So you have the book. The book itself is the advocate. I don't agree with most of what's presented here until we get to the we document. I tell you, when we get to the we document, I do agree that that's a fairly accurate presentation. So I'm not being unreasonable when it's not a very reasonable presentation. I will try to point that out. When it is reasonable, I will also point it out. So again, I think that's the way it should be taught. The fact that others don't teach it or you haven't heard it that way is not my fault. It's their fault. But that's my apology to you for whatever it is worth. So we have here in chapter 8:12, Philip believed, or they believed Philip, and he was preaching these things. Once again,